with God for all eternity, and it's just going to flow out of us. And so today, it's just a little bit of a sacrifice sometimes. And what a privilege it is to come and to worship Him. So good. Okay, so I went through my sermon this morning, and I do not want to make any false promises, but it might accidentally be a little short. What? Okay. Oh, joke. Okay, so we are in our summer sermon series, and I always like to study like a character, and I want to see how God has been with our faith relatives, our heritage in the past, how He's been faithful back then, so that we know that He's faithful today, right? And so we've done Elijah, we've done Nehemiah, I'm forgetting somebody, but this summer we're doing Joseph. And we have been in the book of Genesis, and last week where we were, we saw Joseph enter Potiphar's house, and he hung out there for a while, and we talked about how he was there and he was being shaped. Last week we watched Joseph become this man of integrity because God was shaping him in Potiphar's house. He was doing something in Joseph long before anyone could see it. Joseph had a lot of ordinary days, a lot of probably tedious moments of being faithful, of just walking with Yahweh. And so this week, if we're looking ahead to the next chapter, we will be in Genesis 40. If I were writing this chapter, Genesis 40 would probably be a verse long. Joseph remained in prison until Pharaoh had a dream. But you know what? Moses wrote this chapter, and Moses, he slows the story way down this week. Last week, if you remember, chapter 39, it covers a decade. It covers a decade of life, and we get to read it in like 2 minutes. And we're like, that's awesome, Joseph. We close the book, we go on our day. Joseph is living that day in and day out for a decade. Where were you in 2016? Yeah, things change over the course of a decade. And here we are in chapter 40, and Moses radically changes the pace of things. He's not covering a decade in this chapter. Chapter 40, he is going to linger. He's going to linger over a few conversations. He's going to linger over 2 dreams. And he's going to linger over 1 Hebrew prisoner. Which kind of makes me wonder, why does this chapter exist? Why are we spending so much real estate? I mean, the Bible doesn't go into detail on everything. Sometimes I'm thinking, I really wish there were more detail in this story. Who's that person's name? What are they doing? And in some places like this, we get excruciating detail. Why would we spend so much time on these dreams, on these conversations? And I think that's what Moses is asking us to wrestle with this morning. And so I'm going to invite you to read it with me. We're going to be in Genesis 40, and we're starting with verses 1 through 8 this morning. Sometime later, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was very angry with his 2 officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. And he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the same prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph, and he attended them. And after they had been in custody for some time, each of the 2 men, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were being held in prison, had a dream on the same night. And each dream had a meaning of its own. And when Joseph came to them the next morning, he saw that they were dejected. And so he asked Pharaoh's officials who were in custody with him in his master's house, "Why do you look so sad today?" Well, we both had dreams, they answered. But there's no one to interpret them. Then Joseph said to them, do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams. So let's hit the pause button real quick and let's see if we can understand some of what's going on here. First of all, I want us to think about Joseph. Our introduction to Joseph in this chapter, it starts with Joseph asking about their faces of all things, right? This is something that is so very ordinary, it would be really easy to overlook. I do it a lot. I had read over these passages a lot and never really cared that Joseph notices faces. Unless, maybe, could it be that Moses, he actually wants us to notice this? Because Joseph has actually every reason to be concerned with himself. Joseph has every reason to be thinking about his misery, about his wrongful imprisonment. And yet, the very first words out of Joseph's mouth are not about him and his trials and his injustices. The very first words out of his mouth are not about his suffering, but about somebody else's. And I think that allows us to ask, well, what does this tell us about the kind of person that Joseph has become? Now, that's a far better question. A lot of times I want to put myself in there and I want to ask, well, what would I do in that situation, right? And I think this is a better question. How has Joseph been formed? Who is he that allows him to respond to this? And I think it's because Genesis is first of all inviting us to look before it asks us to imitate. Joseph has become the kind of man who notices people. And it's easy to kind of write that off, like maybe that's a personality trait. Maybe that's just how he naturally was. I don't know that it wasn't a personality trait, but what I think I can say with confidence is that this is a reflection of God's own heart. Joseph has come to know a God who sees. Now later at the burning bush, God's going to tell Moses, I have indeed seen the misery of my people. I have heard them crying out. This is the God who will see Hagar in the wilderness. This is the God who hears Israel in Egypt 400 years later. Joseph is beginning to resemble that God. And it's like this compassion isn't something that Joseph just does. Compassion is actually something that perhaps he has learned from the God he knows. The God he's been walking with. That's been shaping him this past decade in Potiphar's household where he had to fight temptation day after day. God was doing something in him. But here's what's fascinating. Joseph doesn't just stop with compassion, does he? That's not where the story ends. Compassion is what opens a deeper conversation. And now let's watch where Joseph immediately points them. It was in Genesis 40, verse 8. Then Joseph said to them, do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams. So the prisoners, don't miss this, the prisoners are like, dreams. I gotta think about dreams. And they have had this little powwow amongst themselves. They shared their dreams with each other. They knew something was up. It's all about dreams in that morning. And Joseph isn't about dreams. He answers with God. He doesn't say, I'm gifted, I've had dreams before. I know what to do with them. I'm pretty good that way. No, instead he says, don't interpretations belong to God. I think that's pretty interesting because he had this moment where he could have been the expert, right? This is something he does. He's been doing it for years, perhaps. And instead, he doesn't make it about himself. He becomes a guide. And what he does is he points beyond himself. So why is Joseph answering the question they didn't ask? They asked about dreams. Joseph introduces Yahweh. Joseph isn't ultimately concerned about impressing these guys. It's not about his status in that prison. I mean, you think about it, he already has some good status. He could continue building that pedestal. He could begin securing for himself more of this prominent reputation. And in case you missed it, he is in the very same prison that Potiphar oversees. Potiphar, who recognized for a decade his work ethic and his skills, who put him in charge of everything. And then he gets wrongfully imprisoned, and Potiphar's like, I know you're wrongfully imprisoned. He never says that. But Joseph misses a really good opportunity to promote himself here, for him to blow himself up. And instead, he doesn't do it. Instead, he stays humble, and what he does is he introduces people to the God who has been so very faithful to Joseph. This may seem basic, but these guys are Egyptians. Go figure. Joseph's in Egypt. These are Egyptians. Here's the deal. These two Egyptians, they have grown up surrounded in long-established religious practices. Egypt has been worshiping their pagan deities for a long time. They have got it down. They've built the temples. They wear the dress. They've got the priests. They've got the rituals. They've got the ceremonies. They've got the priests and the gods with the names that Joseph can't even pronounce, right? And let alone worship. And yet, right there in an Egyptian prison, not a temple, they hear about Yahweh. Joseph is not a priest, right? He is not a preacher. And yet, he's just simply this faithful man whose life keeps introducing people to God. Everyone who meets Joseph leaves knowing something about Yahweh. There's something I think that I'm tempted to miss in this moment. You might miss it too. But have you ever met somebody who's like really incredibly kind? Yeah, I have. And you have no idea if they follow Jesus or not. Those people exist. There are kind people out there, but we have no idea what their faith is. And that's why Joseph speaks. It's his compassion that makes people willing to listen. It's his words that help them understand why he's different. Because in recent decades, we've gotten really good at privatizing our faith to the point where we do not talk about God in every conversation, where we do not talk about him to our neighbors and to our coworkers and to the people in the street and the store that we meet. We get into this point where we have assumed that it's not okay to talk about God every day with every person. We assume that it's not wanted. We assume that it might hurt somebody's feelings. We assume that we might get in trouble. And instead, what we sometimes like to say is this: let your life speak. You don't have to use your words. Just live it out. Joseph would probably say, yes, absolutely, let your life speak. And when the opportunity comes, you gotta tell people about the God who changed your life. Because without compassion, his words are gonna feel hollow. And without words, people may never put two and two together and recognize it's God. That's the reason he's compassionate. God's the one who shaped this man. And that's a pretty beautiful balance, right? And it feels altogether familiar. It's like we've heard this someplace before. Because we see that Jesus, he rarely announces himself before he loves people. He touches the lepers. He eats with the sinners. He weeps outside of Lazarus' tomb. And then he explained, kingdom. It was his compassion that allowed people, that prepared them to hear his words. It was his compassion and his proclamation that belonged together. And together they revealed the Father. And that's exactly what we see Joseph doing in this prison conversation. And so let's keep listening to this conversation. We're going to pick it up in verse 9. So the chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream. He said to him, "In my dream, I saw a vine in front of me, and on the vine were 3 branches. And as soon as it budded, it blossomed, and its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, and I squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and then I put the cup in his hand." "This is what it means," Joseph said to him. "The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position. And you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just as you used to do when you were his cupbearer. But when all goes well for you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here, I have done nothing to deserve being put in a dungeon." When the chief baker saw that Joseph had given a favorable interpretation, he said to Joseph, "I too had a dream. On my head were 3 baskets of bread, and in the top basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head." "Well, this is what it means," Joseph said. "The 3 baskets are 3 days. And within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and impale your body on a pole, and the birds will eat away your flesh." Now the 3rd day was Pharaoh's birthday, and he gave a feast for all his officials. He lifted up the heads of the chief cupbearer and the chief baker in the presence of his officials. And he restored the chief cupbearer to his position so that once again he put the cup in Pharaoh's hand. But he impaled the chief baker, just as Joseph had said to them in his interpretation. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. These dreams, they are coming true exactly as Joseph said. And here's the thing, they had plenty of time to see, hey, is this God that Joseph speaks about? Are these dreams actually going to come true? Notice that these are not abstract dreams that are happening like 300 years in the future. There's going to be a very real due date for Joseph's interpretation. Is he telling the truth? What's actually going on in this moment? What is actually going on in this chapter? Because has anything actually changed with Joseph? No, nothing's really changed. I mean, we just had a lot of conversation. Joseph's circumstances are still the same. He is still in a prison cell. His freedom is still non-existent. So it changed. Well, now we have 2 Egyptians that know something true about Yahweh. Isn't that remarkable? I think we finally start to see what this chapter is all about. Because God wasn't producing this dream interpreter. He was producing a faithful witness. You see, Joseph could not choose where he lived, but he could choose what he revealed. And he revealed compassion, and he revealed integrity. He did not have to speak that hard sentence to the baker. And yet he was faithful with both the good news and the bad news. Joseph reveals truth. He is revealing the character of God. Joseph is refusing to become the center of attention. He isn't a preacher. He isn't standing in a synagogue. He's just a faithful man who happens to be in an Egyptian prison. But everybody who meets him walks away knowing something about God. This cupbearer learns that God speaks and will speak to him, even though Yahweh is not this man's God. The baker will learn that Yahweh tells the truth, that God does what he says he will do. And eventually Pharaoh is going to learn that God gives wisdom. Joseph is not simply like a theology teacher telling something to his students so they can take notes and think intellectually, oh, that's who God is. No, what he is doing is he's just simply living this life that reflects who Yahweh is, and he then introduces with his words people to Yahweh himself. And here's what I think is even more fascinating. Joseph, this is just his everyday. He has no idea that this conversation matters. He doesn't know about the dreams that Pharaoh will have in a couple of years. He doesn't know that the cupbearer will forget about him and then, one day he is going to remember Joseph stuck in that prison. He doesn't know that. He has no idea that this is a regular, ordinary conversation that he is having with two roommates, I guess you could say. Just altogether ordinary. And yet it will change the course of his life. He's just being faithful in the place God had him that day. Now that's faith. That's faith in action. To live it out, even when you have no idea what God is doing tomorrow. So last week we talked about how God was forming Joseph. You guys remember that? Like that decade of life that was very boring. But here's the thing. God wasn't doing that just for fun. Formation is never an end in itself. God is shaping people so they can reflect him to the world. That has always been God's purpose, is to go pursue the world. Like Linda was talking about, God has always pursued us in love. He started in Genesis, where God met Adam and Eve and they walked together in the cool of the garden at night. God always pursues. He meets with Daniel in the lion's den. He meets with his people. He speaks to them and he woos them back to himself. God is always going after us and telling us who he is and inviting us into intimacy. And he does that with the hope that we do the same. As he forms us, it's never for only our own benefit. He does it because it benefits the person next to us, and the person that we run into at the gas station, and the person that we work with, and the person that we go to school with. God shapes us so that we can reflect him to the world. And that's true of Joseph, and that's true of us this morning. And like Joseph, there are probably several of you in this room that are like, I'm in this season that I did not choose. This was not how I scripted this season. This is not what I wanted. And you are tempted, I am tempted sometimes to wish that life looked different. I wish I was fill in the blank. Healthier, wealthier, wiser. Right? We're waiting for healing. Might be waiting for a job. You might be waiting for that reconciliation with that person. And you might just be waiting on God to please move in my life. Genesis 40 reminds us this morning that even when we're waiting in these really less than ideal circumstances, that God's people reveal God's character wherever God places them. Wherever he's placed you. And so I think it's important for us to remember this morning that the people around Joseph, like those two Egyptians, Pharaoh eventually, like everybody that meets him, they do not need accurate answers. They need an accurate picture of God. And so do the people around us. So here's our question for this week. If someone encounters you this week, what will they learn about God? Joseph could not choose where he lived. But he could choose what he revealed. And so this week in 2026, whether you're in McCrory or if you're in Branson or if you're in Springfield or wherever you find yourself this week, you cannot choose the circumstances that will unfold in front of you. But what you can do is choose what you reveal. Amen. And so, as we prepare to leave, I want to leave you with this encouragement. Beloved, may the people around you and me encounter compassion that reflects God's heart. May they encounter truth that points beyond ourselves. And may people hear us living lives that naturally speak of the God who has been faithful to us all along. Beloved, go live for God in faithfulness this week and go speak his name. Go in peace.